Hello everybody, Resonance here with another Pokemon Ultra Sun Ultra Moon Wi-Fi Battle analysis to help you improve your overall strategy. You can find links to more of these below, as well as a comprehensive competitive tutorial. Thank you as always for the support. In this specific Wi-Fi battle, I'll be showcasing a very unique Corrosion Salazzle, designed to dismantle some OU walls. It's particularly effective against things like Heatran, Ferrothorn, Rotom Wash, and more. In addition, this is a fairly non-standard Mega Gardevoir team. My opponent has a very well-built team, so kudos to him. I could tell it was going to be a really difficult one to break, and that it would take specifically my Salazzle to do it. And now it's time to break the meta, turn by turn. As the battle begins, let's talk overall strategy. My opponent is bringing a very standard OU Rain offense team that relies on Pelipper's ability Drizzle, which sets up the Rain Weather effect for 5 or 7 turns whenever it is sent out. Rain boosts the power of Water-type moves for both players, which synergizes well with his 3 Water-type Pokemon, and it weakens Fire-type attacks, which protects his Ferrothorn. Keeping Pelipper in check will be essential to winning, and so my first priority is going to be disrupting that game plan. I will lead with my Goodra in case my opponent leads with Pelipper, since I can outspeed it and KO it with Thunderbolt. If Ferrothorn is his choice for an early Stealth Rocks, I can KO it with my Flamethrower, and if Rotom Wash is the pick, then I wall it completely. I cannot lead with my Excadrill for my own Stealth Rocks due to the 3 Water types. My opponent will opt to lead with his Rotom Wash, which is a great neutral play since he can just Volt Switch out of an unfavorable matchup. On turn 1 he goes for a Will-O-Wisp to burn my Goodra, which could be a fine play for some residual damage, but I'm not a huge fan since it risks a miss immediately, and the 6.25% damage is not that important since my own team is bulky offense, so I won't be staying in for that long. He misses the Will-O-Wisp, which ultimately doesn't matter, and I go for the Thunderbolt for some free chip damage, and predicting him to go for Volt Switch and send in Pelipper for the Rain. If my opponent wants to go into Tapu Koko, then the electric terrain that it sets up will make it take a huge chunk from my T-Bolt. I was a bit confused by my opponent going for Will-O-Wisp turn 1, and since it missed, I thought that he would stay in to go for it again, despite it being a somewhat poor trade. On turn 2, I decide to go for Dragon Pulse, which does the most damage to Rotom. Meanwhile, he chooses Volt Switch, and now Tapu Koko comes out, predicting my Dragon Pulse or Draco Meteor, so that's a great play. Let's pause for a moment for some key analysis. On turn 3, I have to make a crucial decision. Looking at my opponent's team, I count the number of special and physical attackers, and I notice that Mega Lopunny is the only likely physical one. Given how well built this team is, I realize that Tapu Koko must also be physical, and we both know that Goodra is only super bulky against special attackers. I also look for potential Z-move users, since many teams run one, and Tapu Koko is the only one here on this team that can run it without sacrificing much. I doubt that the Greninja is the one holding a Z-Crystal, since it's a Rain offense team, so his primary win condition is likely going to be sweeping my weakened team with a Choice Scarf Ash Greninja. Bearing these facts in mind, I make the bold prediction that a Z Wild Charge is coming, and I switch out into my Garchomp, which is immune to electric attacks. You only get 1 Z move per game, and it's extremely powerful, so making my opponent waste it this turn is absolutely critical to winning. With the electric terrain boosting electric attacks, my opponent's Z Wild Charge would instantly KO my Mega Gardevoir, Tapu Lele, and Salazzle. But here's the thing, Tapu Koko has base 130 speed. I have no reason to go into any of those Pokemon, even if my Lele is Choice Scarfed. If I stay in, my opponent knows that Z Wild Charge will do up to 50% in valuable chip damage. However, I know that my Goodra is my only check to Pelipper, a great sponge to Rotom, Tapu Koko, and can punish the terrain with my Thunderbolt, so I'm not going to let it take free damage. Being cognizant of which members of your team are necessary to win, and which can be traded away, is an important skill to have. On to turn 4, my opponent goes for Protect to scout what move I'll go for, which is a great play. I decide on Earthquake, trying to get a free kill on Tapu Koko if he decides to U-turn on me since I'm actually Choice Scarfed, and therefore unexpectedly faster. My opponent doesn't know that yet, and since Protect always goes first, he still can't know that I'm faster or Choice Locked into only using 1 move until I switch. Now that he knows that I want to Earthquake him, he switches out into Pelipper, which is immune to Earthquake and is another great prediction. Now the Rain is set up for him, which is pretty dangerous for me. With me being locked into Earthquake for my Choice Scarf held item, I have to switch out, so I go into my Mega Gardevoir, which like all of my Pokemon, runs a non-standard EV spread designed to counter OU meta teams. Therefore, I know that I'll eat a Rain-boosted Scald from Pelipper, and can threaten it out. Mega Gardevoir is one of my win conditions, and while I don't like it taking damage early on, I recognize that this is one of the few safe opportunities that I have to send it out without any risk. I decide not to overpredict and instead just go for Hyper Voice to KO Pelipper, but my opponent predicts that correctly and then goes into Ferrothorn. Predicting the switch with a Focus Blast would have been a terrible play, because if it misses right there, then I risk losing the game on the spot if he stays in and scalds me again. Here I still get some nice chip damage without overpredicting. Fearing the Gyro Ball, I switch out into my Salazzle, which resists it. This is also my only opportunity to switch it in before Stealth Rocks come out. My opponent predicts me to stay in and Focus Blast, so he goes for Leech Seed, so that way he can protect next turn and make me waste my Focus Blasts or stall for a miss. It's a good mid-ground play too, that covers most of my switch-ins. And now the meta-breaking Salazzle is here. Since I have the unique ability Corrosion, I can Toxic this Ferrothorn, which is otherwise immune to it because of its Steel typing. That would cripple it completely, and is one of the only ways that I can win this game. Very few Salazzles run Corrosion or Toxic, since they're usually oblivious with Nasty Plot, so I figured that I can catch him off guard here. I go for Toxic, but my opponent fears the Z Fire attack, and withdraws into Rotom. My opponent's defensive core is composed of Rotom Wash and Ferrothorn, and if I don't remove one of them, then they'll be able to sponge all of my attacks. I managed to get the Rotom poisoned, but as you can see from the Leech Seed recovery, it's still at a really healthy range. Toxic will do an ever-increasing amount of damage to my opponent until they switch out, and normally this would be very useful if I didn't plan on deleting this Rotom immediately when I saw it. Onto turn 10, my opponent does not know that I have the Poison Z Crystal, so I surprise him here with an Acid Downpour. This is a crucial play, since I needed to weaken this Rotom earlier with my Goodra's Thunderbolt for my Z-move to KO it. At most it usually does 90%, so the first tick from Toxic wouldn't be enough. I needed to Thunderbolt it earlier to get this kill, and I only had one chance with my Z-move to break through his defensive core. I really had to think that far ahead. I knew I needed that chip damage to win, but the battle is far from over yet. With Rotom unexpectedly KO'd, I finally turn a massive disadvantage at Team Preview, since I only have one Water Resist and many lower tier Pokemon, into a small advantage. My opponent uses his free switch after the KO to go into Tapu Koko to once again set up electric terrain. I know that Tapu Koko is faster and can knock me out with an electric attack, so I switch out into my Excadrill, which is immune. My opponent then immediately withdraws into Pelipper on the same turn, boldly predicting my switch to Excadrill. That was a very good simultaneous switch on my opponent's part, catching my Excadrill off guard. This will of course force me to withdraw. I'm now threatened out by a rain-boosted Scald, so I have to switch out into my Goodra, correctly predicting that. This particular Goodra of mine carries the Assault Vest Held item. This allows it to take significantly reduced damage from special attacks in exchange for only running attacking moves. As you can see, thankfully the Scald does almost nothing, and the rain wears off this turn, which means my opponent is very likely to switch. My opponent now withdraws fearing a Thunderbolt and goes into Tapu Koko. But I go for Thunderbolt anyway, since the electric terrain gives it a fierce boost, despite it being resisted. While Goodra is a great Pokemon, it's definitely not as good as I make it seem, and you really have to build a team around it if you want to use it well. It just happens to be one of my favorite Pokemon, so I always find ways to make it work. So now I switch out into Garchomp, predicting any of Tapu Koko's physical attacks. I figured that if he has Brave Bird, which does 50 to 60% to Goodra, that Garchomp is still a good switch, even though I don't resist it, since my ability Rough Skin will make Tapu Koko take a ton of recoil damage. Now Tapu Koko is extremely low on HP, and so it should die to most attacks. On turn 15, he goes for a Protect again, scouting my attack, as this time I go for Outrage, predicting the switch into Pelipper. I did risk the Protect, but I could not lock myself into Earthquake and let Pelipper in for free to set up the rain again. If he stays in, I can always go back into Excadrill. My opponent now switches out into Pelipper to set up the rain with its Drizzle ability, as it just expired during the previous turn. In addition, his Koko would KO itself with another Brave Bird thanks to Rough Skin. My Outrage does a nice 60% to the Pelipper on entry, putting me in a decent position. Actually that's a bit closer to 70. Now, on turn 17, my opponent makes a good play by switching again into Ferrothorn to resist my Dragon-type Outrage and make me take some recoil damage from its ability Iron Barbs, which is the same as Rough Skin. And here comes the punish, and where experience always trumps a strong meta team. My opponent knows that Outrage has now been used for 2 or 3 turns, which means I could switch out if I wanted to, and at this point I'm likely choice locked into using it. Using it again against Ferrothorn would make no sense, as I just get stalled out. Given that the rain is up, my team is weakened, and I'm basically guaranteed to switch, he sees this as a free Greninja sweep to win the game. But here's the twist. I knew that by going for Outrage against Tapu Koko earlier, that type immunities and/or protects do not count for my 2 or 3 turn Outrage requirement. The user always gets confused when Outrage ends, so I'm actually still locked into it since it failed the first time. The duration really started with Pelipper, not with Koko, so I bait in the Greninja to snag another crucial KO. This is the type of situation I really dread, as Mega Lopunny can be a difficult Pokemon to beat, due to its combination of speed, attack, passable bulk, and the ability Scrappy, which lets it hit ghost types. My opponent made a great play by taking advantage of this opportunity to send it in for free. I have to send up my Garchomp, even though it will faint, just to weaken Mega Lopunny. I'm faster due to my Choice Scarf held item, and I have to be careful with how many priority moves I run, because of Tapu Lele's Psychic terrain. Since I only needed Salazzle to trade for either Rotom Wash or Ferrothorn, I was fine with letting it get knocked out to let my Garchomp in this turn. My Garchomp has Choice Scarf to boost its speed for this exact reason, to prevent myself from getting swept while still being able to run Psychic terrain to protect my own team against opposing priority moves. With my Garchomp down and Lopunny weakened, I can now go into Goodra, which I know lives everything that Mega Lopunny can have. This is why I was so conservative with Goodra's HP early on. Besides it also being a necessary water resist, I needed it to live this attack. If I wasn't thinking this far ahead, I would have stood no chance at all. I lived the Ice Punch and KO my opponent's second win condition with the Dragon Pulse. Again, the game is far from over yet though, as Koko is still a huge threat and Goodra is too low for it to check it, or anyone anymore. Koko comes out, and with the terrain boost, it easily kills me with a Wild Charge. We are now 3-3, and it's super close. Tapu Koko is such a threat with the terrain up, so I have to let Goodra faint here, just to get the free switch in. In response, Excadrill comes out, so my opponent withdraws into Pelipper, predicting my Earthquake correctly. I was fine with that since I knew if I forced in Pelipper this turn, it would be the same turn that the rain ends, and therefore his Drizzle ability would not activate. It's been absolutely essential this game for me to keep track of the rain to avoid getting swept. I have to switch again here in case a Scald comes out, but he predicts that by going for a U-turn instead, putting my Gardevoir in range of the next rain-boosted Scald and giving him a free switch. He then sends out Ferrothorn for one last Hail Mary. We're at turn 25, and I've now considered all the possible ways that this game can play out. I will lose if I do not go for Calm Mind here and hope that my opponent incorrectly predicts my switch by going for a Leech Seed. The Leech Seed was actually a good play, but I always try and consider not just my own win conditions, but also my opponent's. My Gambit pays off, and I get the read correct. I now have enough special attack to KO this Ferrothorn with a Focus Blast next turn, even at this HP range. I just have to not miss. Ferrothorn is so bulky that it would live an unboosted Focus Blast. I go for the Focus Blast finally, since I'm in a position where I have to risk it. If this wasn't my Mega Evolution, usually I would run the Fightium Z Crystal. That way I basically get one Focus Blast that doesn't miss, because more often than not, Focus Blast is a move that you really only need to hit like maybe once or twice, so getting the first one guaranteed is great. But unfortunately, I do miss it, and immediately die to a Gyro Ball. However, this is one of the many reasons why I picked this battle to analyze. I always have a plan B. I send up my Tapu Lele, which I know KOs Ferrothorn with a Choice Specs boosted Focus Blast. Choice Specs is a held item that allows me to only use one move, but in exchange, it boosts my special attack by 50%. I've been saving Eve this entire game, so now is the time. And I miss again, so I just die to another Gyro Ball. But fear not, my friends, for competitive Pokemon is not an exercise of existential nihilism. That's Mario Party. I've always got a plan C. The moral of this story is to plan ahead. Use Pokemon that you like, be creative with your teams, and only use Focus Blast when you absolutely have to take the risk. Same thing with Stone Edge and just taking unnecessary risks in general. You'll notice that I always save those for later in the game. It's time for DeRoche to test his mettle. He switches out into Pelipper predicting my Earthquake, and gets it right. To make sure that I don't get walled by flying types, and if this is my last Pokemon, this specific Excadrill carries Rock Slide. As a result, I get the surprise KO on the Pelipper. This is one of the many reasons why I tend to favor running unique movesets and EV spreads. Like I explained in my detailed tutorials, Pokemon is really all about the mind games, and if your opponent doesn't know what you have, then that can give you a really nice advantage. Tapu Koko comes out, which doesn't really scare me. I know that DeRoche lives everything at this range. He protects as I go for Earthquake again. Now that Pelipper is gone, it's a pretty safe play. I think it was ill-advised to protect here though, as most Excadrills could just Swords Dance here, and then you'd lose. Likewise, going for a second Protect doesn't accomplish much, besides stalling me out of Earthquake PP. Thankfully, there are mechanics against this, and overall my opponent is a really impressive battler. My opponent protects again, but it has a 50% chance to fail that goes up every time if you use it twice in a row, and so I knock it out with another Earthquake. Things could not be closer. It's now 1-on-1, and Ferrothorn is sent out. This is why another one of my Excadrills that I also bred carries Swords Dance, so that way I do not risk getting stalled in this exact kind of situation. I go for Earthquake and my opponent does not actually Leech Seed me, and instead goes straight for the Power Whip, trying to race me. We both exchange some damage. It's time to click Earthquake yet again, as finally some sweet justice strikes. RNGesus, to make up for me missing 2 pivotal Focus Blasts that I spent the whole game setting up, has blessed me with a Power Whip miss. RNGesus is a fickle god sometimes, but if you play well and do not blame him for your losses, you will find out that overall, he does reward good plays over enough games. In this case, it's just important not to put yourself in a situation where your only win condition is hitting 3 consecutive Power Whips with a Ferrothorn. In my case, I usually run Swords Dance with this team, so that way I have like 30 plan Bs. And with that, I barely live the next Power Whip at a meager 3 HP and get the game-ending kill with a final Earthquake. In the end, I planned it so that I would have won if either Focus Blast hit, so the Power Whip missing was just a way to even it out. What a crazy game, seriously. And a big GG to my opponent for playing well and really testing my experience. Future Wi-Fi Battle commentaries will be much shorter, but I really wanted to showcase this one step by step because it took an extremely meticulous amount of strategy to win. I really hope that everyone enjoyed this analysis. If you found it useful, please do let me know in the comments. And for anyone that is looking for a quicker battle, I'll have plenty of those too. I'm always interested in your feedback, and hearing what types of videos you'd like to see from me next. There are plenty of Pokemon tutorials on my channel, more to come, and as always, your support means a lot to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. GG, well played!